Hi folks, and welcome to the third installment of cinematography and framing video lesson. We're going to talk about camera angle and distance today. The first thing I want to get through is just a set of vocabulary terms that are just really useful for conveying to someone reading your writing or your descriptions of a shot what the shot scale or camera distance is. So when I say shot scale, what I mean is something like close-up or extreme close-up. So what is an extreme close-up? Usually something that is a fragment of a face. That's a good rule of thumb for how close an extreme close-up is. A close-up is generally a head from the neck up. A medium close-up is generally chest or shoulders up. Medium shot is generally waist or belly up. Medium long shot is generally knee length up. The medium long shot is important in the history of American cinema. The French used to call that shot length the plan américain because it was so common as a scale to shoot scenes in and then cut in for close-ups. A long shot is something when your human figure is going to be more or less dwarfed by their environment, but not as dwarfed as an extreme long shot in which a human figure will become something close to an ant on screen. Now, as you can tell, these are loose terms. There is no hard and fast distinction based on kind of scientific measurements. Just use them at your discretion. And generally, when I'm grading things, I'm going to be pretty accepting of differences. Here's a kind of quick and dirty way of seeing all of the different shot scales in one film with one human subject. Distinct from shot scale is camera angle and level. High angle shots are those that look down upon their human figures or objects from high. Low angle are shots that look up upon human figures or objects from below. Canted angle or Dutch angle is any time you take a camera and then you rotate it such that you're getting a skewed diagonalized image, something associated with kind of avant-garde techniques. Over the shoulder is a term that's useful for conveying a shot that conventionally hovers over the shoulder of a character looking at themselves in the mirror, like here, or most often, a character engaged in conversation with another character. So those are just the terms, and that's pretty simple and straightforward. But I want to talk a little bit about how those terms get attached to things like interpretation. So Bordwell and Thompson give us this, I think, very useful warning in their textbook. They say, sometimes we're tempted to assign absolute meanings to angles, distances, and other qualities of framing. Does filming from a low angle automatically present a character as powerful? Does framing from a high angle always render the character as dwarfed and defeated? Verbal analogies are especially seductive. Does a canted frame mean that the world is out of kilter? That's a rhetorical question, and I think the answer to that rhetorical question is no. In other words, I think they're trying to poke a hole in what is a tendency in film interpretation, or at least an intuition that folks might have when they latch on to the study of film, which is to say that, if I'm going to learn how to do film analysis, doesn't that mean that a low angle always means that the character is rendered powerful? And I want us to find an analogy between this warning and Susan Sontag's against interpretation. Remember that I said it was a text that's going to be important for us. Here's one use of it that I think is important. Remember, she says, the task of interpretation, the kind of interpretation that she doesn't like, and that I want us to be suspicious of in this class, is virtually one of translation. The interpreter says, look, don't you really see that X is really, or really means A, that Y is really B, that Z is really C? Essentially what Bordwell and Thompson are pointing out, which is a kind of dangerous, fallacious way of thinking about film analysis, is that formal element X, like a high angle, can be translated to expressive element A, that the character is dwarfed and defeated. Film analysis would not be fun if there were a dictionary. It wouldn't be fun or interesting if there were a dictionary of interpretations that we could just look up and say, what does this technique mean? It's just a poor view of art, but a seductive one. And I understand why some folks may be disappointed by this. I want to still align myself with Wardwell and Thompson and warn you about the seductiveness of saying every low angle makes characters feel large. I'm going to play silently this clip from Citizen Kane, in which it's the night after the titular character, Charles Foster Kane, has lost an election.
It's something to be played your way, according to your rules. Charlie, I want you to let me work on the Chicago paper.
What?
Well, you said yourself you were looking for someone to do dramatic criticism. I am drunk.
So I simply want to just show you this scene, partly because I think it's a simple way of supporting what Wardwell and Thompson are saying. It's an extremely low angle. It does, in a way, physically emphasize the size of the actors, given that we're looking upon them from a very low position. But it doesn't necessarily connote power. If anything, if it does connote power, it does so ironically, given that this is a moment in which the character, who is indeed hungry for power, has lost a great deal of it. So we have to consider the ways in which narrative content has to be considered first, or it has to be always considered in conjunction with a particular way of shooting something. Hitchcock is a director who is famous for using high angles throughout his films, and yet I think there would be a mistake if we were to say that a Hitchcock high angle always means one particular thing. You'll remember this moment from Rear Window. The high angle is there to kind of pique our interest, right? We don't quite see what Jeffries is writing, but the high angle gets our attention. And the camera movement forward grants us the wish of being able to read the narratively significant piece of paper that he's writing. In North by Northwest, we have something totally different.
You're not taking on that plane, of course I am. Like our friends, I too believe in neatness, Leonard. This matter is best disposed of from great height.
My apologies if the sound is a little low on that. What's happening here is that we have a villain in a Hitchcock film played by James Mason, and he's planning on murdering his wife, who he's just discovered has been lying to him. And he says, this matter is best disposed of from a great height, as the camera ascends at the same time. And this is not so much a kind of weighty symbolism, so much as a kind of a gag corresponding with what he's saying, which is that he means to use his airplane as a murder weapon. He means to take her on a trip, and then he's suggesting he's going to drop her from the airplane. And then the camera almost foreshadows, or almost tells us, explains to us that this is the means by which he's planning the murder. We can get two similar shots that convey a similar kind of feeling from these films, Notorious and Marnie. Marnie we've looked at briefly in this class. Notorious is one we haven't. We have two similar sequences of a banquet, of a party, in which what Hitchcock wants to do is kind of hook our interest by having the camera move into a bird's eye view and then slowly move towards something. That does two things. It displaces our attention so that we don't know where to look when the camera is very high, right? We've lost our protagonist, we're looking for an object of attention, but the slow movement tells us that we're going towards something important, but we don't know what, right? This is an important aspect of what you can do with a high angle, right? And a rather distant shot. Shot scale matters as well. On the left, we seem to be zeroing in on an object of importance, and I won't explain to the plot what it is, but the key, as you'll see in Ingrid Bergman's hand, is important. Now on Marnie, we're zeroing in on the door, in which case we'll be introduced to a character, this person who we know is from Marnie's past and is going to threaten to reveal a dark, dark secret. So both shots, high angles and extreme, or not extreme, but long shots, convey a similar kind of purpose. Here we have high angles in the birds like this one, which are meant to remind us or convey the idea that the birds that Tippi Hedren is afraid of are coming from above, even though we can't see them, right? Before you give us any kind of symbolic analysis that the camera dwarfs Tippi Hedren or something like that, you have to acknowledge that the camera position seems to align itself with the birds that aren't there, thereby reinforcing our belief that in the off-screen space, the birds are attacking the house. And in this very creative use of a high angle from Hitchcock's film Topaz, I think before you move to a kind of symbolic interpretation, you have to acknowledge this very clever effect that happens when this person who's just been murdered sinks into the floor, but the way that she sinks, you can see the purple dress kind of spread out beneath her, almost as if it's a kind of substitute for blood. I think this effect is very deliberate, but it's only an effect that can be seen and felt in that particular way given the angle from which it's shown. In a similar way, we might say that we cannot interpret this canted angle from the film Brief Encounter with some kind of dictionary definition of what a canted angle does, but we can
I wasn't listening to her.
listen to what the film is telling us.
I was listening to the sound of his train starting.
Just a bit of context, this is a film about a love affair, and it's told from the perspective of this woman who is our protagonist and narrator. And this is toward the end of the film when she believes that she'll never see her loved one again, the man with whom she's had an affair. And she's exhibiting, in fact, a kind of dark, depressive trail of thought.
Then it did. I said to myself, he didn't go. The last minute his courage failed him. He couldn't have gone. Any minute now he'll come back into the refreshment room pretending he's forgotten something. I prayed for him to do that. Just so that I could see him again for an instant. But the minutes went by.
Is that the train? Oh, can you tell me, is that the Ketchworth train?
No, it's the express.
The boat train.
Of course, that doesn't stop, does it? I want some chocolate, please.
No complaint.
And I want us to pause right there. Now what you're seeing is a kind of sequence of dark thoughts. And you have this moment in which he stops narrating her thoughts and you just look at the turmoil growing on her face. And as that turmoil grows, that interior sense of things getting worse in time is emphasized by the camera literally rotating toward a canted angle. And you can see that correspond with the intensity of her eyes increasing. And at a certain moment, she gets up and interestingly moves toward the direction that the canted angle is almost pushing her towards, right? It's almost as if the camera has created a gravitational pull on the left side of the frame, and she's moving toward that gravitational pull, as if there's an element of something that she cannot control in this moment.
Trembling right on the edge. But I couldn't. I wasn't brave enough.
So what this scene is depicting is in fact an almost attempted suicide. It's quite dark material. But I want us to pay attention to the way in which it constructs the canted angle as a visual signifier of turmoil. As a visual signifier of a kind of dark, depressive, self-destructive mode of thought that then subsides as her thoughts become regulated slowly at the same time that the camera rights itself and reinstates the even horizon line. Right? That is how you can read a sequence that teaches you how to interpret its own cinematographic principles. So I want to maybe do a little bit of analysis of one aspect of framing and distance in A Man Escaped. It's a film that's filled with close-ups. And we talked about how close-ups reinforce a sense of off-screen space, but I want to talk about one aspect that of the film's close-ups that isn't simply about what is off-screen, but also is about what we actually see. What we see in this film is a lot of close-ups of hands. Hands doing things, hands doing very impressive things, hands that are impressive in their dexterity, right? Just think about what we see in these little moments that I've selected, right? Incredibly precise movements, and Robert Bresson was famous, as I mentioned in my notes, for having his actors do gestures over and over again until they became almost automatic. Things like this. And I have to admit, there's something mesmerizing about watching him do this. And I hope that you feel that a bit too, that there's almost a kind of beyond narrative interest in looking at this kind of dexterity, this magical dexterity that's on display in this film. And if you're a fan of this kind of thing, Robert Bresson would do this a lot in his other films. In fact, there's a famous film of his called Pickpocket, in which you can imagine the dexterous exercises of hands and fingers and pickpocketing people on the street is what's emphasized in the close-ups. But what can we say about this beyond the fact that it's visually interesting? Well, we can actually start to think about what the film is telling us. There's this moment where Fontaine kind of reflects upon the work that he does, right? This is a film about manual labor very much, and we focus on manual labor. And there's this moment where he says, Terry's departure and the death of a comrade I had never seen left me in distress. And then he says, nevertheless, I carried on with my work. It prevented me from thinking. And I think that's a really interesting and insightful way of thinking about what the close-ups are doing. And Susan Sontag, to bring her up again, this time a different article that she's written, she'll reflect upon this very thing. She'll say large sections of this film and Pickpocket are wordless. They are about the beauties of personality effaced by a project. The face is very quiet, while other parts of the body, represented as humble servants of projects, become expressive, transfigured. One remembers Fontaine's large, graceful hands at their endless labors in A Man Escaped, the ballet of agile, thieving hands in Pickpocket. Through the project, exactly contrary to imagination, one overcomes the gravity that weighs down the spirit. And to kind of translate that into ordinary speech, she's suggesting that, and I ask you to reflect upon the last time you've become absorbed in a kind of manual activity, something like drawing, or woodwork, and what that can do in a way to assuage your interior troubles, or maybe your kind of reflecting, cogitating habits. It does have a way of kind of assuaging those problems. Another critic, Morella Jonah Afrin, says the protagonists of both these films are shown exercising their craft with patience and rigor until dexterity becomes automatism, and automatism gives way to grace. In other words, there's something about focusing on the automaticity of hands doing these kind of habituated gestures that makes us feel as if we are seeing a body kind of free from the turmoil of the mind. So if we return to these moments throughout the film, these close-ups of hands doing very precise, dexterous manual labor, we can say that they're not just conveying the fact of Fontaine's necessary means of escape. The means themselves, we learn, are actually part of Fontaine's ability to sustain himself, to kind of efface the interior turmoil of being confined, and to lose himself in his body's ability to do certain things. That's what we can get from a close-up, and that's how we might think about the relationship between cinematographic technique, that is close-up, and the themes of the film. Okay, so with that, I'll leave you, and we'll see you next time for editing.